Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first in our series of committee conversations in the Durham Committee on the Affairs of Black People Political Action Committee. Tonight, we start our series with Senator Valerie Foushee, who is running for U.S. House of Representatives, District 4. Correct. Correct. So welcome, and we're so happy to have you join us. Part of this series is just getting an opportunity to know you better, giving us an opportunity to hear more about your platform and, learning ways that we can be in support of you. So again, welcome. And I invite you to just take a moment and share something about yourself that we might not know, that we probably may not read in a resume, but give us a chance to know more about you.
Well, first of all, let me thank you, Tia, for having me, and thanks to the Durham Committee on the Affairs of Black People for this series that does give an opportunity for the public to hear from us and to get a sense of who we are and what we will do given the opportunity to serve them. So I'm grateful for that. I think it might be difficult for me to find something to tell you about me that you may not have read, but I am certainly a native of this district, a native of the state. Grew up here. What people may not know because they don't get a sense of background, but in growing up in this area, I grew up, in poverty. I grew up during segregation for most of my youth. And so I've had a chance to see this area evolve, to see things change, and many of them for the better. But what I also have had the opportunity to observe is that there are so many things that are left to be done, particularly as it relates to equality and providing the quality of life that can be attained by every resident in this district. And so having the opportunity to serve over time in different positions on different levels has given me what I call building blocks, be able to hear what the issues are, to observe what the challenges that we all face, and then working with others to provide solutions or to provide resolution to those issues and challenges. So I hope that's something that maybe everybody did not know.
Thank you. Thank you. During some of our conversations together, you have spoken quite a bit about what's at stake in this midterm election. And I feel it's really important that people hear your point of view because it's daunting. So just let's have a little conversation around that, please.
Sure. So let's start at the federal level. I think that what we've seen over time, particularly since the January 6th insurrection, we know that clearly democracy is at stake. Protecting and preserving our democracy, which hinges on voting rights. When you have one individual who is able to put forward a big lie, a lie that maligns the integrity of our election system, and to have people to follow that lie to the point that they would work to overturn our government, to just take away any belief that we as citizens have in the process, then we realize that our democracy is very fragile. And so we are at a point where we must do everything we can to strengthen our economy, to have people to understand that there is integrity in the process, to help people to understand how important the right to vote is, and to have people to realize that it is a right, and that we as elected officials need to do everything we can to make sure that there is unfettered access to the ballot box, and that we should make voting easier and not harder. So that's one thing. And I do believe that we know that the House has already passed the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, but that is something that needs to be passed through Congress and certainly signed into law. And what we know over the last few weeks, particularly since the Supreme Court has overturned the Roe v. Wade decision, is that women's reproductive freedom is on the ballot for the midterms to talk about bodily autonomy, which is our God-given right that women should and must have the right to control not just their bodies, but the choices that they make regarding their health and family planning. And then, of course, we all know that as we move through this pandemic that has changed the way we even live over the last 2.5 years, and to be heading to where we thought we were facing the endemic phase of the pandemic. Well, we're not sure of that anymore. And then to have another virus that's running through our society, there's so much work to be done as it relates to healthcare and being prepared for viruses such as we're seeing now, because as we learned when we started to move through the pandemic, we knew that it would not be the last situation that is likened unto that. And then, of course, climate change, climate action is on the ballot. We're seeing more fires, we're seeing more extreme weather. We are past time to do something about that. So when I think about where we are as it relates to climate action, that is something that should unify us because it affects all of us. And certainly, we are at a point where, and we can talk more about this later, but where we are in our economy and what inflation and what we hear is a pending recession. Those are things that are prevalent or on the minds of most people as it relates to the federal government. But I would also like to talk about what's at stake for these elections as it relates to the North Carolina legislature. Because we know that from 2013 until 2018, we saw a whole, many pieces of legislation that have been enacted into law that have not served the people well. And in 2018, we were able to break the supermajorities in both chambers such that Governor Cooper had the power of the veto for so many of those pieces of bad legislation that was passed by the General Assembly. But Governor Cooper was able to veto them, and we were able to sustain those vetoes, 43 of them since 2018. But during this election, the midterms elections, Republicans only need to claim 2 or pick up 2 seats in the Senate and 3 seats in the House before they have supermajorities again, which means for the next 2 years of Governor Cooper's tenure, that will not be the case. And so we know what we've already been hearing from the leadership. The Republican leadership has already not just signaled, but they've been very clear about the agenda moving forward in 2023. We know that the congressional maps that we're all running under for the midterm elections is for one election. And that in 2023, the General Assembly will again draw congressional districts. And if they are in position to change what those districts look like, then of course they're in position to change the balance of power, because they will have changed the balance of power simply by acquiring supermajorities in the General Assembly. And so there's so many things that are so important to ensure that we turn out the vote, to make sure that people understand what is at stake for not just the state or the country in general, but what it means for their personal lives. And lastly, I'll say, for the North Carolina Supreme Court, which currently has a 4-3 Democratic majority, there are 2 seats up. And if one of those seats is acquired by Republicans, then that balance and what we believe will be a court that rules without fear or favor, I think will be destroyed. So there's a lot at stake, and we could probably fill our entire time talking about what it means for individuals, what it means for the state, and certainly what it means for the country. But I hope I've said enough that would have people to think that this is a serious time, that even though we hear every year, regardless to whether we're talking local elections or we're talking state or federal elections, we say that this is the most important election of our lifetimes. But certainly, this one really is the most important election of our lifetime.
Thank you. And I hope each and every one of you out there are listening. The fact that your vote really will make such an incredible difference to allow Governor Cooper to maintain that ability to veto. We have to do all that we can to support our folk who are all of the issues that Senator Foushee lifted up. In order to be able to make those things happen, we need to be able to hold our positioning. So I hope that you are paying attention and understanding how relevant your vote is, how relevant your neighbor's vote is, that you promise to bring someone with you to the polls or help other people get to the polls. And I just want to drop this out there. We will be reaching out to you if you need help. We will figure it out to make sure that you get there. Senator Foushee, you have a rich history with the education, and I know that's very important to your platform as well. Would you talk a little bit about the things that our children are facing in the educational system? You talked about some of the pitfalls, and while sometimes we're looking at things on a very surface level, I appreciate in talking to you, you've talked about what's happening deeper. And just if you would share some of your thoughts as well. Thank you.
Sure, and thank you for that question, because education is near and dear to my heart. And I'll just say, if you don't mind, I'd like to preface my remarks by talking about me personally. I was a product of high school dropouts. But my parents were, they were quite intelligent. They were passionate about education out of love for their children. And I am the oldest of 6. And they made sure that we were doing our best, that we were going to be educated, basically whether we wanted to be or not, because they knew that was the ticket out of poverty. That was the ticket to be able to have the wherewithal to be prepared for certain jobs, to be able to be just about anything that you wanted to be if you were adequately, certainly educated, but certainly to get all that you could get. And so to be able to rise from that because of education pointed to me that education is a great leveler. And so even in those situations where people don't have the means as it relates financially, if they're able to acquire an education, then that is a vehicle. So what I think what we're seeing, because we're in an area, this district, particularly because of Orange County and Durham County and the universities contained therein, we have access to all kinds of opportunities on the surface. But when you look beneath the surface, you see that everybody does not get that same opportunity. And so when you have in your state constitution that, because it's not in the federal constitution, that every child has the right to a sound basic education, then those of us who are in charge of that need to make sure that that is applied equitably, that the resources are available regardless of zip code. And when you have those situations where you are not honoring teachers and you are not paying them adequately, you're not respecting the profession, then you don't have the best and brightest that will go into the profession. You have situations where when people don't feel respected, if there's something else they can do and they don't have to go through all of those hoops, then they will go elsewhere. And so our children suffer because they are not getting a well-qualified or highly qualified teacher in every classroom. They're not getting access to the kind of knowledge that will prepare them for the next level and the next level, such that when they enter the world of work, they're ready. So my thinking now is that we have put so many hurdles out there for teachers, and then we put hurdles there for students, and then we put hurdles there for parents to understand their role as it relates to having their children prepared for the classroom, but allowing teachers to do what they've been trained and taught to do. When you take away that respect, again, as I've said, you take away the best and brightest. But we also have a situation now where we have this movement that is not just particular to our state, but it's a movement across the country where we have a distraction called CRT. Critical race theory, where we are focusing on what should and should not be taught as it relates to American history, that we are trying in some ways to hamstring teachers from being able to teach the standard course of study as it relates to history, because of what some would say makes some children feel one way or the other. Well, what about the other children who just want to learn what their history is, such that they're not doomed to repeat it? Me being a student during segregation until I was in 6th grade, you know, that 1 week of Negro History Week was not enough to teach me African American history. That was not enough to teach me Black history. That was not enough to have me to understand what our place in American history was. So that distraction is also taken away from what should be happening in the classrooms. And then again, we know that over the last 2.5 years, Tia, from the time that schools closed in late March or early April of 2020 until they started to reopen, that every child was not logging on. Every child was not participating in the process. For many of them, it was because they didn't have access. You know, we do have a broadband issue in this state and in this country. So if you have students who don't have access to the internet at home, and the closest access is on a school bus that's parked outside of a Hardee's restaurant or Bojangles. And then parents who are working in person and not having the opportunity to take their children so that they have that access, those children aren't being educated. And so you have severe learning loss with many of our students. And add to that a situation whereby it's unfair to hold them accountable because they don't have access. So you say that you're not going to fail kids, but kids go to the next level with learning gaps. So all of that to say there are so many things now that need to be addressed as it relates to providing the resources to make sure children are having access to broadband, that children are being able to make up for that learning loss. Whatever remediation needs to occur is being resourced. And certainly last but not least, another thing that we learned, many of us knew, but it was exacerbated by the pandemic, that many of our children were not, they were suffering from food insecurity. Mm-hmm. And so where we got CARES money to make sure that those same school buses that were providing access to broadband was also coming to communities to bring nutrition to those students, such that they were able to log on and able to have meals and able to prepare their minds so that they could learn. There's so many things now that need to be addressed that go beyond the distractions that are posed by CRT, but that we are providing nutrition, we're providing educational opportunities, and we're certainly providing access to broadband so that students can take advantage of that. I think that we also realize that the fact that we don't have enough of pre-K slots such that students are getting access to early childhood education that prepares them such that they enter K-12 prepared, that they have had access to books, they have had access to culture, they've had access to what most kids who present on that first day of school have had access to, such that the playing field is not so lopsided. There's so many things that we could do and we can do. And I'll stop there unless you have more questions about that. I hope I touched on some of the things that you were interested in, and hopefully our listeners are interested in.
You did. Actually, I'm guessing that we're going to claim when elected, I believe one of the subcommittees you would be interested in is education and labor. Education and labor. So yes, thank you. And it seems like you touched on things that really hit home for a lot of people when we're talking about going out to vote and people are having to balance what's happening in my home. Is my child getting the resources that they need, the nutrition that they need? And then you said you're also looking at labor. So sometimes I can't think about what it is I need to do to vote because I'm concerned about the workforce or how am I able to sustain myself, how's my community able to sustain itself. So I'm just going to roll right into talking about the economy. And what are some things, well, first, identifying some issues with the economy and how, when in office, what would you do to help address that? How would you advocate for us here in North Carolina around the economy?
So there are a number of ways. There are some things that I believe to be low-hanging fruit. And one of them has been something that we have talked about for years. When we think about what the minimum wage is, that's crazy. I mean, you can start with not just implementing what some would identify as a minimum, but if you're going to be talking about a minimum wage, it certainly should start with being a livable wage, a wage such that people can sustain a family. But part of that also has to be about bringing in good jobs. North Carolina has benefited of late with a number of new industry coming into our state. But we have to prepare people for those jobs. And we have the opportunity, again, when you talk about where we are, and particularly with having the kind of community college system that this state has. Those 58 community colleges that we have are among the best in the country. And right here with Durham Technical Community College, that has been preparing people when they were looking for training, or when they were looking for retraining, or if they're looking for certifications. We have the best right here. And so as these industries are coming to this district, then we need to make sure that we are funding the community college system such that people are able to avail themselves to those jobs. But we also have to talk about workforce housing. And so when you look at what's happening in this area, in the Triangle, housing costs are crazy. You can have a job, but you don't have access to housing. You can have a job that pays a livable wage, but you can't afford the rent in this area. So my concerns and my goal would be that I am in a position to work on bringing resources to this district that would provide for workforce housing. We also know that being able to have access to affordable health care is paramount, that people who are trying to determine how they're going to pay for rent or a mortgage, or how they're going to provide for groceries, given what inflation has done. I mean, just over a short period of time, we have seen inflation higher than it's been in 40 years. So that's not something that you can make a quick adjustment if other things are not being adjusted simultaneously. So, you do have to have workforce housing. You do have to have access to jobs, and then you have to have access to training. But you also have to have a transportation system that will provide for access. So I did have the opportunity to participate in a meeting regarding transit with Congressman Price and our transit leaders in the Triangle. And so putting those resources there so that we can talk about commuter rail, that we can talk about providing that access, that those routes, when they are constructed, that they are constructed in such a way that people can be connected from their homes to their jobs without having to get into a vehicle, which also works to the environment, but having to get into a vehicle to go to a station to be able to get that transportation to those jobs. So all of those play into our economy, and making sure that what we have not done, particularly in North Carolina, is to make sure that these ultra wealthy corporations are paying their fair share. There are ways that we can reduce the deficit. There are ways that we can provide for those who are among the least of these, who need assistance as it relates to housing or nutrition. Those are all things that I want to work on, and hopefully get the ability to work on for this district as the country moves to beef up its economy. and move through this inflationary period.
Thank you for that. I was just thinking about, you were talking about the training for young people to move into the workforce. And is our workforce available or ready for them? Or are we going to build a force of people and then they have to move away because they can't afford to be here? And are people taking that into consideration?
But I wish that I could say I think that it is at the forefront of most folks' minds, but I'm not sure it is. I think that for a long time, Tia, we've given lip service to affordable housing. And now we've moved from talking about affordable housing because as much as we have done in that area, affordable is relative. And it seems that the goalposts are forever moving. So rather than talking about affordable housing, now we're talking about workforce housing. We're talking about having housing available for people who are not getting the highest of salaries. But there are ways, we talk about what can be done. We talk about the strategies. We've talked about tiny homes. We've talked about the homes that are being made from the canisters. All of those things are solutions, but we haven't come to a place where we have put the strategies in place to put them on the ground. And I think that that's what we're moving to. I know certainly I've heard those talks in Durham. I've heard them in Orange. But there has to be a point where we have the political will to move from the rhetoric and talk about what is feasible now. I think one of the things about my style, if you can call it that, that sometimes comes under criticism because we don't all think alike. But I think that sometimes we go for the perfect. And it is at the detriment of the good that we don't do what we can do now because the goal is this big and it takes this long to achieve that goal, rather than talking about, so what are our resources now? And how can we command these resources to move forward, to start something, to make some things available for some people while we're trying to make more available for more people. And I would just submit to you that there has to be a time where we start talking about, well, what is it that we can do now? Sometimes we're in the mode of talking more about what we can't do, or what we're not able to do, rather than to talk about what we can do. Say to folk when they're asking, well, how can I do? Don't tell them what you can't do. Let's talk about what we can do, what's feasible. I'm hoping that that's where our conversations are going as we talk about transit and workforce housing and nutrition and education and the economy as it relates to the number of jobs that are coming. We have an automaker coming to Chatham. We have Toyota is doing a battery production here. We know that more pharmaceuticals are coming here. We have biotech here at amazing levels. So we know that jobs are coming, but who's going to be prepared for those jobs, and how do we prepare folk who are interested and who can do the work and who want to do the work? How are we preparing them to be ready for the work? How are we preparing them to be able to go in with resume in hand and certifications in hand, saying, this is what I can offer. What can you offer me?
So a couple of things I was just thinking of when you talk about it. You say, how do we do all the things? It feels overwhelming. And I think of the saying, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time, right? And so, yes, it's overwhelming. I also think what's important, and you touched on, is getting all the people together and talking in the room. And sometimes, we have all of these answers in silos and everything sounds overwhelming. But if we are talking about developing a workforce, and then how does that workforce get to be engaged and stay in our community and be stronger so that the communities are more sustained, better sustained, we have a stronger chance of being the overall community that we want. Something else you touched on, so I want to ask a little bit about this. Would you speak to some of the uniquenesses of the different counties that you would represent?
Sure. So the Congressional 4th District is composed of Orange, Durham, Alamance, Person, and Granville counties. And so where Durham is certainly the center of the district, in many ways, it has the largest voting age population. It certainly is the largest county and the most urban. Orange has an urban center, but Orange is largely rural with many farms. And then you have Granville, Alamance, and Person. All three are what would be considered rural counties. It's an interesting mix. And so the ability to have traveled since late December through the primaries to all 5 of the counties has been very interesting, because as we've talked about these issues, they're not the same. I would in each county. I think you can pretty much say that what you see and feel in Durham and Orange are probably commensurate. A lot of that has to do with the fact that they are university counties, and that when you look at the population, when you look at who lives in these counties, then you're talking about pretty much they mirror. Certainly Durham has more commerce than Orange, but when you talk about the populations, you're talking lots of similarities, particularly with the focus on education and what we have by way of providing employment through the universities and the school systems. In Person, which is the smallest county in the district, you're talking about a county that is struggling to bring commerce to it, that a county that is more, I guess I would say that Person and Alamance in particular are more conservative in how what their values are, how it relates to what they believe is important by way of education and commerce. Not to say that one is better than the other, but I think the focus is different because the counties are different. There's more agriculture in those 3 counties. But what I do know is, as I was in Granville County twice last week, what I do know that is the same is the desire for the same things, the desire for adequate educational opportunities, rather, for the children, that you have elected officials who are courageous enough to address and attack issues such that they're not just something on somebody's radar, but because they are prevalent throughout the communities that you're talking about, bringing solutions. I think for me, Alamance is probably the county, given how large it is, it has an interesting balance because you have a lot of agriculture, but you also have an urban area as it relates to Burlington and those small townships that border. But you also have a university in Alamance County. You have a popular university, Elon. So there are some similarities with Orange and Durham in that respect. But again, the populations are different, of course, in Orange and Durham, and much smaller in the other three counties. Although Alamance is a big county geographically, not so much in population as it relates to Durham and Orange.
Thank you, Senator Foushee. What I'm hearing you say is that despite the size of the county and the different needs, you have an awareness of the differences. You are paying attention. You are not afraid to speak on behalf of those folk about the things that they need. And that is what I believe people are going to the polls, and they are looking for someone who will do that, someone who won't treat my particular community as cookie cutter. You're actually looking to see what resonates, what those communities need, and that's important. And so we appreciate that you can see the different complexities of community and also see the places where there is overlap, where there is connection. And I hope that people who are listening today also get a sense of that. And we appreciate the work that you are putting in, the work that you will be putting in moving forward. We are coming close to the end of our time. And so I just wanted to give you opportunity if there's something that I didn't touch on that you would like to share with people. Anything that you have noticed since December as you've traveled to different counties, as you're talking to lots of people. I'm curious to hear, like, what are some of the things that possibly are resonating? You talked about education, people really caring about how their children are going to fare. So are there things that you'd like to share with us along those lines?
Well, thank you for that. And certainly I am grateful for this time. I think, what is important is that people have hope. And so I think in every county, people are looking for representation that is not just listening, but responding. And so, as problematic as some things have been, I still believe in this country. I believe in democracy. I believe that all of us working together, that we're going to be able to fix many of our ills. I think what I have not talked about, because I don't think we've given a lot of talk between ourselves, but this relates to gun violence. I think if there's anything that we've not talked about today that I have heard everywhere is, when are we going to do something about gun violence? And when are we going to work to remove the death grip that the NRA has on this country? I think that we see it every day. I'm hoping that we're not becoming numb to what we see. I think that when you look at what is happening in the country, and you look at the poll and you see what people are saying in our communities, on the local level, on the state level, and on the federal level, people want something to be done. People want it to be more difficult for people who are having substance use issues, or they're having mental health issues, or they are people who just should not have access to assault rifles or assault weapons. that there is some reckoning, there is some prevention for people having access, that we can implement red flag laws, that we can say that it makes sense to have background checks before we allow people the ability to carry weapons concealed or whatever. I think that if there's anything that has crossed all of those counties, and indeed across all of our counties, all of our states, and across this country, people want something done about that as we talk about criminal justice reform. Those two things go together in those conversations. And we still see that people of color are still suffering through the hands of law enforcement. Well, how do we combat that? How do we ensure that those that are sworn to serve and protect have the proper training, have the proper wherewithal to do that work, such that they don't live in the kind of fear that before they can ask you a question, they feel that they have to use a weapon? You know, those are also two subjects that are on the minds of people in this district as we see more gun violence every day. So certainly, as I was able to work on our criminal justice reform bill at the state level, I would hope, given the opportunity, that that is also an area where I am able to provide some influence.
Thank you. And I am so glad you brought that concern to the forefront because it is very important. And I dare say it impacts every one of us. If it doesn't impact us immediately, we know, we have knowledge of someone
Absolutely.
lives it has touched. So again, thank you for being very clear about your understanding of that and your commitment to working to get us to a healthier place around those conversations. Wow. Just very grateful to you for those pieces of, I'm sorry, I just thought of one more question.
Sure.
Talking about healthcare and wrapping that into the economy. I've had conversations with people lately, just the overall affordability of things, of cost of healthcare, people trying to determine, you know, whether or not this hospital visit, you know, we've got COVID, is this something I can afford to do? Or when it comes to the cost of prescription drugs, and you hear people splitting their pills, that hasn't changed because we're still impacted by this. So anything you want to share along healthcare?
Sure. Well, I think the first thing, because we have been fighting for it since 2013, is to expand Medicaid in this state that will provide that access to so many people who fall into the coverage gap. And it will also stop the closing of rural hospitals in particular. We've had a number of hospitals to close simply because they can't afford to provide care to folk who are uninsured. And so we know that the leadership at the state level is considering it. I do believe that some form of Medicaid expansion is likely to happen before the end of the year. But I also want to point to the Inflation Reduction Act that President Biden has pushed, that is going to at least reduce some of the costs of healthcare, particularly as it relates to the elderly, such that they won't be paying more than $2,000 out of pocket for prescription medication. So, you know, there are a number of things that we can do, but we just have to get in there and do them. Providing for access to healthcare such that people have, you're not traveling more than an hour for emergency care. Because I dare say that if it takes you an hour to get to a hospital, when there is an emergency, then that's not access to healthcare. That's not even, we're not even talking affordable. We're talking simply access. And that is the case in many places in this state now where their local hospitals have closed. So the first step to that would be to expand Medicaid such that we're able to provide those resources so that those hospitals are open and accessible.
Wow, thank you. Well, we are close to the end of our time. I am really grateful for your, just being open to telling us like it is and how you see it. Again, let us know how we can be in support of you. In these last, I think we have 62 days before Election Day,
I think it's 70.
70.
I wish it was 62, but I think it's probably 66, maybe somewhere between 60. I'm trying not to count.
Okay.
Let's just say this. We know that early voting, so I'd like to get this plug out. Early voting starts October 20th. So we want people to know that. Get ready, get ready, get ready.
Get ready. Thank you for joining us today. Is there
this opportunity?
You're very welcome. Is there any last thoughts that you'd like to share with us? And again, I want to open the invitation for you to come back to political committee meetings and things of that nature, but anything that you'd like to share with people that are watching today?
Just that I am honored to be in this space, in this place at this time, to have the ability to go into November believing that after November 8th, I will be the person that gets to represent this district in Congress. I am grateful for all of the support that I've gotten, particularly from the committee and others in this district. I'm excited when I'm not intimidated, but I think that keeps me balanced. And I look forward to the opportunity to come and share with you all again.
Thank you. So everyone, remember, Senator Valerie Foushee is running for U.S. House of Representatives, District 4. We look forward to your support of her so that we can celebrate come November 8th. And I encourage you all, our next committee conversation, I believe it's September 14th, but we will send out information regarding. Thanks for joining us this evening. Have a great night.